Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season 2 of Conversations in Pop Culture. And before I introduce my two guests, I want to remind everybody I have now four links up there. So I have my two guests, their website, as well as their Kickstarter, which is launching tomorrow. So obviously, if you like this interview and you like what you're hearing, please go back to their Kickstarter, as well as I have two links for myself up there, which is a Cash App link and Buy Me a Coffee. So if you want to support this podcast and everything that we do here, feel free to use those two links. But obviously, I want you to definitely check out my two guests, what they're doing. I'm going to talk about it. And even going beyond all of that, please share this podcast around because it means a lot to me and it gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling. So without further ado, I am bringing the creative team behind Yule, or Jewel.
No, you're right.
I got it right.
You got it right.
Yo. Okay, so I got that right so far, sort of. And that is John Durgin and Joel VanPatten from Livid Comics. So welcome to the show. Hopefully I got your names right, but I'm excited.
Yeah, man, it's a big honor to be on your show. It's really thanks a lot for giving us a shot here. So definitely appreciate that.
Yes, we appreciate the opportunity, man.
Yeah, so I am very excited. Now, obviously, I sort of tipped my hat a little bit talking and announcing your comics. But before we get into that, I am curious how the two of you met and how Livid Comics formed, because you guys are a new comic company, a new comic publishing company, and some of the people listening probably have not heard of you guys before. And I know my audience most likely hasn't. And so I kind of want to give them some insight into that.
Yeah, I'll let you take the lead, John. Have at it, buddy.
Yeah, sure. So Joel and I actually work together at our day job. Joel has been an artist for years, obviously. So he had his paintings hanging up around the office at work. We used to talk art all the time. I'm into art. I draw. He knew I wanted to be a writer. We used to talk about some story ideas I had and so forth. Then COVID hit. We started working from home. And Joel reached out to me and said, "Hey, man, you got any cool ideas for a story for a comic book?" And I was like, "Actually, yes." I started writing Yule as a novel initially. I was about 20-30 pages into it, and I started thinking this would work so much better as a comic book. So I sent him. We had already talked briefly about the story, anyways, but I had sent him the outline of what I was doing. He said, "Yeah, let's go with it." So long story short, our day jobs, we worked together. We happened to sit next to each other in the office. It was kind of destiny, we just hit it off, started talking about art and so forth. And here we are.
And then obviously you have this idea for a comic, and then where did the idea say, hey, let's form a publishing company and an imprint type thing? Because when you form an imprint, it's different because now you're in a business, and comics are a business. And so what prompted that? Because, some people just say, hey, we're just going to do a comic, and then we're going to build a business on top of that. But you guys seem to have the infrastructure somewhat in place, which is super interesting, because I know there's some other ideas coming down the pike.
I'll let Joel take that. I mean, he was always thinking big, so when he's the one that actually came to me saying, "Hey, let's go bigger," so I'll let him take this.
Sure. So my background, I was doing fine art for a long time, for about 10, 12 years now. I've been an oil painter, and I had 2 shows down in Boston last year, and they were pretty slow and defunct because of the lockdown. So a lot of people weren't showing up. So I had to say, okay, do I continue to chase, this fine art thing, or do I try to pivot for a business move? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, the art is a business, right? So I had to pivot. So my youth, I was drawing books with my brother, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, just doing things around the house, around the house, getting out to friends and things, nothing big, like kids do, right? So I said, well, why don't I go back into that and start doing that again? So that's when I said, well, it's a great time for comics and sequential art. Why don't we go ahead and try to move forward with that, kind of put the fine art on hold and do that going forward. My background, I've started and run about 4 different companies over the years. So I have that kind of mindset anyway, entrepreneurial mindset, to try to build out something bigger and better, and hoping. And the main idea with Livid was we wanted to be, cooler and sexier than anything else that's out there. So we always work on quality as our number one goal for everything that we produce. If you pay us $6, $7 for a book, you're going to get $6, $7 worth of stuff for sure. But we're hoping that we can branch out. You know, we're really supportive of the indie scene. We really want to help other artists, other writers, other people who need that nudge to get up off the ground. Well, we're willing to help you take that ball and run with that.
Yeah, and obviously, I'm sure we're going to get into some of that and what's coming down, or maybe we won't because maybe we don't want to spoil anything. I don't know, but obviously, I want to talk about Yule because that's sort of what you have coming out. Obviously, the Kickstarter is dropping tomorrow, and it's a very interesting book. And obviously, it's got a little bit of a Christmas theme to it, but I think going beyond the Christmas dressing, as I like to call it, we're sort of dealing with a very interesting character in an interesting world, and he's traveling. So what is the basic premise? Because you guys are going to explain it better than I will.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you the origin of where this came from, why it was based on Christmas, and then how it expanded, because it was December of 2019. I have a 7-year-old son. His name's Will, which the main character is named after him. I asked him around Christmas time, you know, is this your favorite time of year? And he's like, no, I like Halloween. It's scarier. You know, he likes being scared. He's in the Goosebumps, Ghostbusters, whatever you can think of, you know. So I started thinking of ideas to make Christmas scary. I was already writing, you know, stuff for myself and, you know, trying to get published as a novelist at some point. So I came up with this idea in my head, you know, what if a kid just a little bit older than my son, you know, happened to get stranded at the North Pole, but it wasn't so warm and fuzzy. There was this outskirts that was creepy and scary, and there was these creatures that, you know, wanted to harm him. And I went into it thinking of the mindset of it has to be okay for kids, but I still want to scare them and also be entertaining for the grown-ups too, you know. So the premise follows 8-year-old William Sheldon. He finds an ancient artifact in the back of an antique shop called the Kasi. It's this cube that can control time and dimension. He doesn't know that, obviously. He sees it on the back of a junk shelf for $1. He decides to buy it while he's Christmas shopping for his dad. You know, in a fit of rage, he ends up triggering the thing and sends himself to this alternate dimension between his home and the North Pole. So that's where we get started. He wakes up. I'm not going to spoil too much for the comic, obviously, but, you know, he's going to wake up in this dimension. He doesn't know where he is. He's cold. He's in a snowstorm. He hears noises in the woods. It goes much bigger than that. Good versus evil. There's, you know, elves involved, alternate Earth. You know, we're going to change some history in there. And, you know, I can let Joel, you know, carry it from here, but the premise ultimately is following, you know, this kid Will, who finds himself in a situation where he needs to get back home. He needs to protect the Cassie, get it to safety, get it back to Santa. So it is, you know, the idea was we want this to be focused around Christmas. I don't want it to be a Christmas horror story where it just takes place around Christmas time. I want it to be rooted into Christmas, you know, but still horror themed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I want to dive into this a lot more, and I might spoil some things. I'm going to try to spoil as little as possible here. Obviously, I do want to talk about Will because his parents are fighting. There's money issues in play, which is a very topical thing in a lot of families, not just due to COVID, where always money around Christmas, and you know, it's the age-old thing where parents fight about money, no matter how much money you're making. And obviously, there's the question: he buys a gift, and then you know he's getting criticized due to money and hours being cut, and a variety of other stuff. And also, you know, Will seems to be a decent type of kid. He seems to have a sense of right versus wrong, but he also has no idea of this world. So what was that like building his character out? Because it is a very interesting character, and obviously he's an 8-year-old. And so he's not an 18-year-old, he's not a 35-year-old, and even building that out because obviously throughout this entire journey he's going to grow beyond being an 8-year-old. And so what was that like? And also, you know, I would imagine he has to believe in Santa at this point as well. Not to break, you know, some mold here and some children who might be listening, but What is that like to also create that and have certain beliefs built in to it, because it can make character writing easier and also harder.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, though. I wanted it to be a little bit older than, where my son's at, mentality wise. But I actually had someone say, "Why is your main character 8 years old? Shouldn't he be older?" An 8-year-old's not going to know what to do. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. He's vulnerable. He's thrown into this situation, and I mean, ultimately, we don't see it much in issue 1, but one of the biggest themes of this whole series is going to be based around Will's anger issues. The Kasi is going to feed off emotion, so you'll see it in future issues. Ultimately traveling through time, different dimensions, and if he doesn't have his emotions intact, he's going to get himself into trouble. And we'll see that in future issues. And like you said, he's going to evolve over time. His parents fight a lot, which helps lead to those anger issues ultimately. And he's going to overcome that. That's the goal, is to get him to overcome that. So when you look at the bigger picture story, we've explained how that works, but deeper than that, it's really about overcoming your own demons and knowing that, there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. So you won't see that in issue 1, obviously, but that's why there's 5 books.
And then he even going further into that, because obviously Kasi, I think it's Kasi, is this time traveling device and world dimension device, and obviously it's based on emotions, as you guys said. So what is that like? Because when we get into time travel, there's a whole bunch of rules, and there's a whole bunch of different rules for a bunch of different people. And obviously Santa is supposed to use it to suspend time so he can deliver all the presents to everybody in the world and make it feasible, which is actually probably logistical. But when you world hop and you rewrite and you're in an alternative world and you're in a world and you go back 400 years, you can mess up a lot of stuff in a lot of ways. And then also, does Will become older when he's time traveling on his journey, even though he might have only spent 4 days in there? He's 4 days older when he gets out of time travel. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could happen. I don't know if you know Caleb Thost, I want to say, but he has a book on time travel. And it's very interesting what he's done with it. And there's a bunch of other books on time travel too. So how did you guys set up those rules? Because that's a whole ball game, and it's Pandora's box, and it doesn't have to make sense perfectly, but it can be complicated, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think I sprinkled a lot of my stuff into John's story and kind of blended it up. So I'm a big alternative Earth theory fan. I love writing of like Graham Hancock, Fingerprints of the Gods, Randall Carlson's work, the Ancient Aliens thing, Skinwalker Ranch, all of that type of stuff. I love it, man. I can get really deep into those holes. So I thought it would be cool to kind of cross genre and appeal to some of those people that are into those types of things and just say, it's just not a good versus evil story. But what if this kid is being pursued by this evil elf throughout history and time, and he accidentally makes things that we know or that we take, it's like, okay, that's history, right? So I don't want to spoil too much of it, but even how, the Kasi gets out of the area and into the junk shop has to do with historical figures in their voyage. So there is some of that in the story also, and people that are familiar with that would go, oh, no shit, that's cool. That's right on with how that worked. So that was kind of the idea for sprinkling that in. In terms of the rules of time travel, John and I have been kind of working through that, and I'm kind of taking a page out of the Doctor Who playbook, where there are some things that are fixed in time and cannot be changed, because people go, okay, why does he just go back in time and kill his 7th great grandfather, Terminator style, and it's no more story. So we had to make some rules where some things were fixed like that. And the Kasi, like John mentioned, is controlled by his emotions. So he travels through time inadvertently to these places. From an artistic standpoint, it allows me to go anywhere I want. So I can go into creating different creatures at different times. I don't know if you ever saw the show Sliders, but that was kind of cool. Like alternate Earths where like something in history happened differently, and now there's an alternate Earth. So maybe that's something We have, a good example. There's a character I'd like to introduce where there's these giant sloths where they basically evolved to human capabilities, but humans never made it. So these giant sloth creatures that kind of rule that world. So things like that allows me to flex myself creatively, which was also a big reason why we kind of sprinkle that into the story.
And obviously, I was going to ask because this opens up a sandbox in a lot of ways, and sandboxes are fun to play in. And so what is I was going to ask, and I think you sort of answered part of it, but both as the John as the writer, even having that sandbox and saying, well, we can have certain things, especially in an alternative world that he travels to, for lack of a better, Earth 2 or Earth 5, to make a DC reference here, where dinosaurs could still be alive, and you then could have dinosaurs in there. Just as an example, I don't know if you're going to throw dinosaurs in there, but the idea is that that could happen, or Earth 5 could be 400 years and the steam engine could never been invented, and then you have a big sandbox, but then you come back to the real position and you're talking about the Revolutionary War. That's less of a sandbox per se, if it has to sort of stay within the timeline of history, and he's inventing something such as the phone, for instance. It would be a good example where it has to be he could help Alexander Graham Bell, for lack of a better word, versus inventing it himself. And so obviously that is something. So what is that like? Because it's very cool to do both of those things, and both of those things are sandbox oriented. But like, what is that like for you guys? Because also you could have issues where it's just like he's in 10 different alternative worlds.
Yeah, and that's issue 1. You're not going to see much of that, right? It's him getting into this dimension and on the run. You get introduced to a couple main characters, but moving forward in each issue, I mean, we have multiple things planned out for altering history, or like Joel said, maybe not altering it, but this is why it happened. Maybe he didn't cause it, but perfect example is what you just said. He could have helped something happen, So we do want to be careful with that for sure. And obviously we don't want it to overtake the plot of what the root of this whole story is, but it initially, just to kind of give you an idea. So I had initially titled this Trapped at the North Pole. My mindset was this kid is at the North Pole. I did want some time travel in there. I mean, Back to the Future is my favorite movie of all time. I wanted to tie that in. But Joel came to me with, I was like, I need to get from point A to point B. And he's like, what if we did this? And I'm like, boom, like, there you go. It just clicked, So, and it also added depth to the overall series. I mean, this is a 5-book story arc to get to the conclusion of what we know is going to happen. But we've talked, on a regular basis about this Yule world can be so much more than that. I mean, there could be spin-off series. There's characters we'll introduce in later issues that, we have backstories already planned for that, we could do a whole series just on those characters. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but, just to kind of give you an idea of where our mindset is on the bigger picture.
And then obviously talking about bigger picture, obviously, and we don't really see this character. I don't think I'm ruining too much here, but he's dealing with an evil elf called Ragnar. And Ragnar wants this Cassie for himself. He wants to keep Santa out of the picture. And we don't necessarily know why Ragnar is doing this, but we know Ragnar has this idea. And we don't see Ragnar for the most part in the first issue. I don't think we see Ragnar at all. But what we get the sense that he's coming into the picture. I think it's pretty much in the description you sent me on the website. It's going to be on the Kickstarter. And so obviously, what is that like to have an elf that sort of knows everything a little bit about this? And obviously that elf is probably going to be following Will into these worlds and chasing after. I don't know if you guys have seen Tsubasa by any chance, the manga, but they're world traveling and people are following them across it. Or the game Golden Sun is another good example. And going old school, E3 had its 4th day today. I have to throw a video game reference in there. Obviously, you're chasing after people. So what is that like to sort of not introduce Ragnar in the first issue, but it's coming?
Yeah, and not to give too much away for issue 2, but he'll make his first appearance there. It'll be brief. You know, I viewed it more of you know, a Harry Potter reference, Voldemort. You know, they talk about this evil villain. You know, you don't even see him for a while. You know, he's just someone that everyone fears. So Ragnar we viewed as this villain that everyone fears. Everyone knows he's coming for that. There's absolutely backstory as to, you know, it's not just, oh, I want this to rule the world. You know, there's a backstory as to why he wants the Cassie. And we're going to explain that over a few episodes, few issues. There will be a backstory to him, how he came to be, how he is. He has some henchmen that we'll introduce in issue 2, which Joel has done the designs for, and they're badass. So it's all coming, absolutely.
And then obviously I want to table there because I do want to talk a lot more inside baseball because a lot of stuff's sort of going on. As I stated, the Kickstarter is launching tomorrow. And you guys have done something very interesting where the book is already done. You had a collector's edition that I think you printed about 100 of them. And I'm not too sure what the collector's edition was exactly. But why'd you go this route? And then you're doing the Kickstarter, which is, you know, obviously, I guess the more mainstream indie approach, but what is that like having a book done? Obviously, I'm assuming you have a printer in place to some degree, or you might even have some of it already printed. And then you also had a collector's edition that came out that sold out ahead of time, because that's a very different approach than necessarily how people are doing it right now on Kickstarter. And it's an interesting approach at that. And I've seen a bunch of other stuff, just for full disclosure. I've seen sort of people do a pre-Kickstarter of very much nude variants ahead of time and very risque variants. And that's like a 7-day Kickstarter or a 2-week Kickstarter. And they do the main stuff. And it's just a very interesting way how to raise funds. I don't know if that was the intention or you just want to get it out to people who are your true fans first and then go the Kickstarter route secondary. So what's the whole thing with that? Because it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think I had a pretty good following from the fine art world, so I have a lot of patrons and things. So when I put that out there, I said, hey, here, I'm going to be switching to doing a comic. I think it piqued a lot of people's interest. They're like, well, what the heck is that? So I had to kind of explain, you know, the business slowdown in the fine art world, going pivot over. So we just started putting it out there. So I threw up, you know, the cover, and it just said, hey, there's this book coming. The collector's edition, to answer your question on that, you know, it has, we're both signed, it's numbered, your name's in the book. You get that, comes in a custom poly bag, it's got trade cards, poster, it's got a whole bunch of cool things that you can only get in that collection with that. So we were, you know, when we started this out, man, it was just like, if we can make enough money to break even, we're cool. You know, and we're like, okay, we'll sell 30, 40 books, whatever, you know, awesome, you know, move on. Then all of a sudden it was just like boom, 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 boom. Like all these people started coming in and buying the thing. So we were like, oh crap, we sold out of that pretty quick. So we weren't anticipating that at all. So the real purpose, you know, the Kickstarter too, is, you know, let's build this out, right? Let's go into issue 2. Maybe we bring in some guest artists for some variant cover work. I like to, you know, hire other artists when I can and help share that love and spread that around too. And that was kind of the reason for it. And then, of course, you know, the marketability of Kickstarter has got crazy, you know, visibility right now. So that's a massive platform. I don't think it's ever been busier. I mean, like, you know, look at some of the books like Berserker and things.
It's very interesting that you bring it up because right now, last year, a month ago, Kickstarter had a higher success rate with more projects on it. And right now it has a lesser success rate with lesser projects on it, which means that last year was the year for Kickstarter, where when more projects are actually on Kickstarter, it does better with funding, which makes somewhat sense, but it also makes no sense because you would tend to think more competition means less things get funded, and it's the complete opposite. And I don't know somebody's probably going to do an economic study on it, but it's very, very interesting. But Kickstarter has a huge amount of visibility right now. And obviously there's a lot of other stuff going on in the comic world. And so obviously though, what is that like though? Because obviously you're getting, I'm assuming the collector's book was covered with all those sales that were done, and I'm sure that you didn't just break even, you did all right with it, and then that also helps. And you probably could have self-published this without Kickstarter to some degree if you're doing what you were doing, but now you're on Kickstarter. And so what is that like? Because I don't think either one of you have launched a Kickstarter before, so it's very, very interesting. Because most people do what you did secondary. And they actually do it sort of on Indiegogo. And so you're coming in from the opposite approach. And I find that to be super interesting. And I have friends who self-publish everything and don't want to go the Kickstarter route for a lot of reasons. And there are advantages and disadvantages. So I am just very, very intrigued by this.
Yeah, I don't think I've done anything like orthodox ever, right? So I mean, that's just kind of how we rolled. Talking business things. I believe that business success is a 4 or 5 pronged attack, right? You got to kind of get it out there. So we have our social media sales, collector's edition. Great, that's 1. We go into Kickstarter. That's 2. We're doing the Comic Con thing, so we're vending out at Granite State Comic Con coming up in September. So we're doing that. We have LCS, local comic shop support already. And then something that I'm kind of passionate about, this is kind of cool, is I've actually connected with a lot of mom and pop local gas stations and corner stores where I actually know the owners like on a first name basis. I'm like, hey man, I'm doing this book. Mind if I hang 5 or 6 here and see what they do? Because when I was a kid, you could go down to the store and buy a book. Your parents getting gas, you go in the store, you buy the book. That's cool. And I'd like my kids to have that experience again. But unfortunately, the cards and the baseball cards and the comics and stuff are gone now from these stores. So maybe through Livid, we can kind of bring out some indie distribution to some of these independent stores also. So that's part of the attack too. That was kind of the thought about it. I don't know if John, have you had anything to add to that as well? You wanted to cut in there?
No. I mean, okay. you hit everything.
And so I am curious because obviously I don't know what you're offering on your Kickstarter. Obviously, one of the things is that I back a lot of Kickstarters. I interview a lot of people who do Kickstarters, and I've been doing this for a while now. And so obviously when I go on Kickstarter, I'm looking for exclusivity. I'm looking for limited edition. I'm looking for interesting projects. And so what does that all look like? Because you got your collector's edition. And so what is going to be, the secret sauce and all that stuff? Because that's what people want to know. And I know rewards and stuff like that, and even stretch goals and even options, and then also even going into digital, because that's sort of a big thing that I think people overlook very, very quickly. Because, if your digital book is $4 and, well, I don't have enough money to go buy a $10 book, but I want to just read it versus collecting it or speccing on it, which is my sector of the comic world that I'm in, obviously. So what is that like? Because digital is very big right now. And it's very exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So when we sold out of the collector's edition, that's what, obviously that's amazing. We were
You kind of tipped your hat though a little bit.
Yeah, we were humbled, but at the same time, we're like, okay, well, we need to come up with something different for Kickstarter now. We can't offer that to people. It's sold out. So we have a Kickstarter only variant cover, which the poster the poster behind me, which there's a light reflection on, is the variant cover, only available on Kickstarter. So when you're buying that tier, you're only going to be able to get that through our campaign. There's a lot of other exclusive stuff as well, but I picked a lot of brains. I've talked to a lot of people, a couple that have been on your show in the past. I've reached out to them. I've supported them on their Kickstarters, but, I asked them to look over what we were doing. If things looked good, what would you tweak? So like Joel said, the idea was book 1 is basically funded, but we're trying to fund the whole series here. And the more we can get out in front of this, the quicker we can get these distributed. And hopefully people read book 1 and they look at it and say, where's book 2? And by us getting funded ahead of time, we can get it out much faster. So that's, ultimately, I mean, when you look at the link and you look at the tiers when it goes live, there's a lot of exclusive stuff, things that people look for on Kickstarter. You can have your face on a character for a future issue if you want. Joel is gracious enough to do some original sketches on certain tiers. There's a lot of exclusive stuff that you won't be able to get elsewhere.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, I think exclusivity is the key here. I also think different is the key here. And so obviously one of the big things that's currently going on with Kickstarter, and I don't know if you guys have explored it, is that what else can you do that somebody else hasn't done yet? Because I've seen coasters and that's sort of big, and that's more out of the norm. And obviously my friend Corey Hardyman from Sister Mercy, he did coasters, and those are always cool. I've seen like hollow foil stickers, but that's always been done. Bookmarks are always done. And so obviously the being in the book is always cool, but I've seen people be like certain characters have their head chopped off and are sort of on somebody's spear on the cover. And I've seen that being done, and I've seen being incorporated into covers. And then obviously I've seen also things with like VR art being done. And so obviously when I back Kickstarters, and this is just my experience, I'm looking and saying, hey, what is different here? What can be done differently? What could be analyzed differently? And so how do you guys feel about like going super exclusive stuff beyond just variants and things like that?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
not to put you on the spot. Not to put you on the spot.
That's a good question. And like you said, this is our first Kickstarter, so I mean, we're willing for feedback as well. What would drive people, that maybe you don't see on a normal basis. We try. I mean, we look through probably 100 Kickstarters. What was working, what wasn't working. Which ones are being successful. Just looking through the price tier points of
that's
what.
Another thing too. That's complicated. Also shipping. That's a big thing right now that's going on. My background is I'm an eBay seller, and I buy and sell comic books on eBay. And so I don't know how many people know this, but the post office in the U.S. in the last 8 months has gone through 2 postal hikes, and it's very expensive to ship a book correctly. I charge $10 shipping. I sometimes win, I sometimes lose. On average, my shipping is anywhere between 8 and 12, and so if I ship out 2 comics, it's running me $20 either way. And so obviously that's a big thing too. And the reason why I bring this up is that how are you guys like handling all that and all that stuff? Because it is very complicated and it's very competitive on Kickstarter. I mean, from my position, I look at 10 Kickstarters and I'll back one. And I'll pick which one I want, especially I just backed somebody's Kickstarter. I have no idea who they are. And I thought it was a cool concept, and it's like a $30 position, and also they were offering a bunch of free stuff with it. But then you have, but also it's complicated, also that healthy balance too. Because the worst thing you want is to give away your entire funds that you raise in stretch goals and rewards and printing. I don't know if you guys know who Jamie Tyndall is.
I know the name.
I don't
know the name.
Jamie Tyndall is a great cover artist. He does Miss Me Now on Kickstarter. And so obviously with the first one, it raised like $90,000, or it might even raise more than that. But the idea is that when you're raising $90,000, you could do prints, you could do bookmarks, you could do pins, you could throw in an extra comic. When you're only doing $5,000, you can't do that. So how are you guys even finding the healthy balance in that regard?
Yeah, I think going back to your original question about what exclusivity do we have to offer, I think we're holding off a lot of that for the stretch goals. So I think our main funding goal is very, very low on purpose, and the stretch goals are going to be very easily obtained. And we're kind of, have some things up our sleeve that we're kind of hiding because we want it to be a surprise, right? There's some cool things that we have planned for those stretch goals. So that's really exciting. To your point, talking about shipping, my background also, I owned a salvage yard for many years, weirdly enough. So I've shipped parts all over the world, and I absolutely concur with you on the nightmares of shipping, and the post office has left a lot to be desired of late, not only their rates, but their quality of service. So absolutely there. What we're going to do with the Kickstarter is we're basically just going to ship at cost, right? So we're going to package up whatever you get, whatever add-ons, whatever stretch goal things end up in that box, put it on my scale, run it through the postal program. Here it is. That's what we're going to charge you. I don't want to make money as a shipper. I'm not FedEx, man. Like I just want to draw comics, you know. So whatever we can do to keep it as low as possible for people, we're going to work through that logistics.
And this is actually very interesting. So I do want to talk about shipping in 1 second with backer kit, because that's a whole different ballgame. And obviously, I'm curious from a first time perspective on that. But also, one of the things that's interesting about your book is that it is a Christmas themed book. I mean, for lack of a better word, and it's not a traditional Christmas themed book, but what is that like launching in June? Because that's kind of crazy. And even I don't know what your expected delivery time is as well, because that's the other thing too. I mean, obviously we all know, we all seen television and their Christmas specials. They're all filmed in August. They're filmed in July and August for Christmas. And so obviously I understand that if you have a Christmas book and you want it to be in the hands in November to people, you know, you got to do it in June or July. But what is that like? Because that's sort of weird to launch a Christmas book a little bit, because from a logistics and operations point, it makes complete sense to actually do it right now, because it'll get into the hands, and Kickstarters run late. It's just the nature of a Kickstarter. When you're indie sourcing a comic, I'm sorry, everything runs late. It's just the way it's done. And anybody says they're on time is full of shit. And so, but what is that like? Because I don't know if people are thinking about Christmas the same way that from a logical perspective.
So, I'll jump in, John. I got real quick, and then you can cut in on me. So basically early on, so a little bit of backstory here. So I got approached by a local television station to say, hey, here's this artist who's going to do a comic book. So I did a piece on the local ABC News channel, and I threw out a date of, I think at this point it was January. So I said, let's get this book out for March, because now I've put it out there. I have to do it, right? So I think we had the art done around end of March or so, pretty much wrapped up. We had the collector's edition sold. But yeah, like you mentioned, everything's behind. We're absolutely running into that with printers right now, right? So it's 2 weeks becomes 4 weeks, becomes 6 weeks. So hopefully we have a rollout date on that campaign of August, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, I could see it coming out by then. The long-term goal would be hopefully to have maybe all of the books done, all 5 by a Christmas release, which would be fantastic. So that's kind of it. So you come Christmas, you can get the whole thing. Maybe that gets released as a trade paperback or graphic novel. That's kind of a long-term plan. So that's a dream goal of ours. So kind of in that time frame. If John, if you want something to add, you can jump in there too.
That was where I was going to head. Was initially, it's a 5-issue story arc. We wanted to put out a nice graphic novel for Christmas. So the idea was to have all 5 issues done, produced, and ready to go by Christmas. Now, we're in June, and I will say, we have a much smoother process now. Book 1, Joel and I were joking about how we started on page 9 because we were just, we were excited. We were moving forward with it. We wanted to do something exciting first, so he took one of the pages where there was some stuff going on and started there. But I was sending him page by page as we were doing it. Without dialogue. I sent him dialogue after. So we were learning as we went. Book 2, he has the full script with dialogue in hand. He's sketching it all out up front. He's going to go back, pencil and ink it, and then color it. And we're almost halfway through the sketching part of book 2 already. So a much faster process now with shipping delays and all that. I mean, like he said, initially we were told 7 to 10 days, then we were told 2 to 3 weeks. It's been a month. We haven't even gotten, we did an alter version just to get a test sample to check it out, make sure everything looked good. It's been a month. We haven't received it yet. So once we get that, we're greenlighting the large order, the actual comic. So I think, according to most printers, or companies in general, things should be picking up moving forward here over the next few months, as people are able to find help, get the workers they need to get things moving at a normal speed now. So hopefully those shipping delays are in the rear view by the time we get, moving on to book 3, 4, and 5. And it's going to be a tight race, but I think we can do it. We want that hardcover or, that full graphic novel out by Christmas. That's the goal.
And then obviously you just mentioned something very interesting because, and I sort of forgot to mention it, that obviously you two own Livid Comics. And so one of the advantages that you have versus a writer who owns a publishing company or an imprint, or they're running it as a business, they need to go hire a artist out there, is that you guys aren't taking page rates for your work because you're taking equity instead. And that is somewhat more of like, sometimes with a creator-owned book, if you and your artist are the co-owners, you might not be taking page rates, but you're taking equity in the book. And so that helps tremendously with costs as well, and also allows a lot of freedom to do it your way versus somebody else's way, because all the money that you're going to use is going to printing, and then on the back end, if you make more money, you're going to, break even. And then obviously that's the way it goes with equity plays. And so obviously that gives a lot more freedom, and especially because you're also are probably looking at it more as a company play than a book play, which is, not to get into the weeds of everything, but that also gives a lot of advantages. Versus if you had to go hire an artist or a writer to do this, it would be way more expensive, and it would have also affected a lot of other things.
Yeah, definitely. So with Livid, some of the long-term goals is we do want to bring in other artists, other writers, specifically looking at the horror, sci-fi, thriller, suspense, drama, or genre there rather, with that. So what we're going to do is I really like the Image Comics model where the artist, the writer owns their intellectual property. So that would be an option for somebody that wanted to do that. We'll say, okay, here's a story, you're the artist. We can do a page rate as one of the options, or do you own these images in perpetuity and get, royalty on sale forever? So that's something that we need to work through business-wise, but we feel, I'm obviously passionate about artists and making sure they get paid because I'm an artist and I want to get paid. So I think that that's a cool business model where, you own the art as an option, you own the story. If it's your story, your art, Livid Comics steps up and helps you make that dream become real, because there's a lot of people, like we mentioned earlier in the show, they just need that nudge. They say, I don't want to deal with the distribution. I don't want to deal with the marketing. I just want to draw and write comics, man. Cool. We can help you with the rest of that stuff. We'll take it from there and help you out with that other thing.
And obviously that's very interesting. A lot of stuff's happening in indie comics. A lot of things such as imprints and, partnerships are being formed left and right in a lot of ways. I mean, Third Empire Studios is a good example of that. Lori Foster and what she's doing. And I don't know the full extent of who owns what owns who, and all that stuff. Obviously, anthologies are very interesting and complicated as well in that space right now. And obviously, building out entire things like that are super interesting. I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you ever heard of the company Kitchen Sink Press.
Yep.
So Dennis Kitchen was on, and he was doing stuff like that back in the 70s, 80s. And obviously we spoke about that. And so it's a very interesting area of building that out and where things are going. And obviously creator owned is such a unique space right now. And obviously owning intellectual property does matter in a lot of ways. But it's also super, super complicated. And so obviously though, but I don't want to, the reason why I'm not doing a Kickstarter is I don't want to ship out. I don't want to run a Kickstarter. I don't want to do fulfillment because fulfillment is a bitch.
Yep.
And it's the idea that is just super complicated. Shipping out things is so difficult. And especially if you have, 600 backers, it can be hard. And so obviously I would not want to do that. And so obviously there's a solution for that. And also people just need that position. So obviously going into where is Livid Comics going, because obviously that's one element of where you guys are figuring it out. But what else as far as comics and even other things that you can offer is in the works right now? Because this is a company versus a comic, you know, and so you have a comic as a product, but you're also a company.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want it to just be Yule, right? That's our baby, our first ever comic into the world, but we have a lot of different comics in development. I just finished a script on a different series that we'll be looking to get to work on, and that's where what Joel was saying, where we want to leverage other indie artists, other indie writers to come in. So we're going to be negotiating with other artists, etc., to put this out there. Joel and I have full-time jobs. We have families. We both have kids. So it's not like he's going to be able to sit there and draw two comics at the same time and get them out in a timely manner. So we need to expand this. We have probably 4 or 5 different comic series in development. And the idea is we want to get as much content out as possible. Like we said, we have the Comic Con coming up in mid-September. Ideally, we'd have 2 or 3 series introduced to people so they don't just see Yule in September. You know, like you said, A Christmas Story in September is, you know, how attractive is that going to be? I mean, obviously, it's a horror comic, so it's not like, oh, you know, we're going to open presents on Christmas. But we want multiple titles out within the next 4 or 5 months.
So to even go off of that, because one of the biggest complaints, and I'm sure you guys have seen it in Facebook groups, and if there are 2 sides to this, and I'm sure some of the people you spoke to who have been on my show that I'm friendly with, and that obviously they are on different sides on the fence on some of these issues, where they're like, well, you shouldn't be running multiple Kickstarters at once if you haven't fulfilled on your first Kickstarter, and you're asking me for money on another project when you haven't delivered on your first one. And so what is that like? And obviously, you know, that's complicated because, well, if you are a big enough company, you know, and I'll use a Fortune 500 company, Apple is working on 10 products at once, and they're not fulfilling on every single one of those products at the same time. And also, if you're a big comic writer, you know, Chuck Dixon is a great example. It's where he's always involved in some Kickstarter, and he could be involved in a given month in 4 or 5 of them. And then there's people who are working on a bunch of anthologies. So it's a very complicated issue. But what is that like? Because obviously you want people to have the books in there, and also it isn't delivering and being as much on time as possible. It does matter, and it is important in a lot of ways. I mean, I've been waiting on Kickstarter since December, and I'm now getting agitated. It's almost July, and the book was finally shipped. And I understand people are busy. I understand people are producing this book, but it was supposed to be shipped to me in April. And so I'm getting agitated. And I don't like it. And I think if all of a sudden you're asking me for more money and you haven't shipped out the first issue, it's like, so what is that like for the 2 of you guys and figuring that out? Because it is complicated.
Yeah, I would think in terms of like how we approached Yule with this Kickstarter is I want the book done, right? So I want that thing either ready for press, in press, or pressed and in my hand before we do that, right? So I think we're looking at the Kickstarter more as paying it forward to the next issue, right? The betterment of the whole. So I don't see us doing a one shot or anything like that. Every series that we're trying to produce, you know, has at least 4, 5, 6 issue behind it. So to fulfill those orders on time, the book would be done. I you know, to your point, I've seen a lot of times where it says, okay, we're in the penciling stage. Okay, well, if the guy gets hit by a car, we're kind of dead in the water here, right? And I think John and I had that conversation too. It's like, man, let's have the book done. So when you get the you know, the risk section of those campaigns, you can say, hey man, the book's done. It's ready to go. You know, we just need some help getting the next one going. And as these ones are going, so now like we talked about, issue 2, you know, is half penciled out already. So we're good there. So now we can run this for 30 days. At the end of 30 days, book 2 is almost ready to go. And so then we run the fulfillment through August. We kind of put the the drawing and the writing on hold, and then we go into thinking about the second Kickstarter, maybe September, right? So that's kind of the approach. If we did that with additional title, I would want the same thing too. I'd want the artist to have the work done and want to be ready to go, and then we release that. So a little bit backwards, like you said, but I think in fairness to the backers of those campaigns, that's the best way to do it in a timely manner.
And then this also raises another question, because right now the two of yours is working on Yule. And so obviously that's what you're working on. But what happens, because I'm sure you notice, and I notice it, is everybody in indie comics and in any indie profession, because I'm a big wrestling fan, and I'm a big indie wrestling fan, and everybody's getting signed. And that's a real issue, where if you have an artist for 3 issues and all of a sudden you have a 6-issue series, you never know who's getting signed next. And it's a crazy world where everybody is legitimately getting signed right now in comics, or is getting whisked away, for lack of a better word, onto a more prominent project. And so what is that like for you guys, especially if you're interested in expanding? I know you're not there yet, but it is a real concern. And this conversation, I've had this with a lot of people, and it's good and bad, because, well, if an artist gets a gig at DC Comics and they work on your book for even 3 issues, it's nice because that's their first work to some degree, or one of their first works. But at the same time, now you got to figure out what you're doing. And so it's a very interesting thing. And obviously you guys are in the comic world, and you're also not jaded like me. So I'm curious how you feel about all that.
Yeah. I'll let John take that one. I did it off talking, so John can take over.
No, it's all good. I think, ideally, like you said, there's pros and cons to that. You could say, hey, guy that did books 1 through 3 now works for DC. Like that should hopefully shoot up our sales numbers, But I think ideally, if we're working with other people, we want to have, hopefully something in place, whether it's a contract or something, something in writing saying, hey, we are doing issues 1 through 5. This is a 5-story arc. We need you through all 5 issues. Are you committed to this? Granted, anything could come out of, they could say yes, sign the dotted line, and then DC comes knocking on the door. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. What are you going to say no to DC? So
even going further off of that, I mean, it's a very weird time for indies, because all of a sudden there's a bunch of indie creators that are now getting brought up. And it's super odd, because this wasn't there 5 years ago. And I know that you guys are brand new to this scene, but 5 years ago, this wasn't even on the table as a possibility. And so it's very cool that things are happening, and that also small publishers are now interested in picking up different comics and licensing books. And obviously that can go one of 2 ways. And so there's all these small publishing companies, that are picking up books and going on Kickstarter and saying, okay, what's going on with that? And so what is that like for you guys? Because obviously you're building out a series, you're building out a company, and you obviously have a very interesting battle plan. And this is something that a small publisher might be interested in looking at beyond even when this hits or going forward, because they're looking for content to publish. And that's where indie comics are going, and it's sort of about to go through an explosion in what I see. And so I'm curious, given that like you're going to be what seems to be producing about 4 or 5 books a year on this, which is on a very aggressive Kickstarter schedule, like, where do you see all that going? Because obviously indie comics are in a really interesting place, and the big guys are now starting to notice it, and small publishers are starting to notice it. So I'm curious, because you're launching tomorrow, and that's not out of the question anymore. And I don't even know if this position was even thought of between the 2 of you at the moment.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, we've definitely talked to, hey, if some of the big dogs come knocking, what are we going to do? So we definitely talked to that as a possibility. Obviously, perfect world, you see your comic series as a Netflix show, or, being picked up by one of these major publishing companies. And we definitely have talked to if that was ever to happen. A
lot of what's going on is that there's places like Belmont or Titan Comics or others that are not the big dogs, but they're giving, I wouldn't quote sweetheart deals, but they're giving really good deals where they're basically saying, hey, we're going to almost give you a royalty and some money up front, but we still want you to run the Kickstarter. And, we just don't want you to sell independently, and we want to be your distribution arm, but you run the Kickstarter and you do everything you want on Kickstarter, and then we're going to do our own variants, or we're going to do a cover A and B. And so obviously that's a very interesting thing, and that's now on the table. And especially if you're doing a series and you have a battle plan, because that's the type of stuff that captures that. And so obviously it's a very different world, and you guys are coming into a really interesting indie world where a lot of this is possible, where 3 years ago this wasn't on the table.
So I can kind of speak to that in like terms of like the gallery world, right? So you have a relationship with a gallery coming off the fine art world, or a gallerist. So there are periods of time in the fine art world, man, you don't sell anything for 3 to 6 months. That's just how it goes. So you got to be prepared for that. And you'll start to think about, well, man, maybe I should compromise my art. Okay, kittens are really popular. I'll paint some kittens because they always sell, right? So that kind of thing. Or, people want to come to you and give you a different offer privately outside of the gallery. And you have that relationship with the gallery. So you cannot be tempted to say, okay, the painting's $20,000 at the gallery. This guy's offering me $8,000. Well, damn, I haven't sold anything in 5 months. Do I take the $8,000? Well, you're kind of cheating on your gallery, right? So I think some of that type of, relationship would have to be there also. Like, it's a contractual agreement. Are there going to be people that break that and do that? Sure, that's human nature, right? That's going to happen. But ultimately, that would be kind of the structure. Is like, we can see Live It as the gallery. The people that work for us are artists that we are kind of taking into our gallery. Hey, man, we got that relationship with you for this period of time. It could be, in the gallery world, it'll be a show, right? It could be a 1-year deal, whatever. We'll make you dinner, but you bring home the bacon, kind of thing. So that's how I would approach that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm just, obviously you guys seem to have a very interesting battle plan with this, and even going forward with this. And obviously I made this suggestion a while ago where I think a lot of indie has to band together. And I think that, you have to almost form conglomerates. We're seeing it in multimedia right now. Disney is a big conglomerate. Amazon is a big conglomerate. Netflix is a gigantic conglomerate. It's not a joke anymore. HBO Max and AT&T Discovery, that deal is a big conglomerate. And so obviously there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think indie has to do that. And we're starting to see that a lot with companies working together and cross promotion and a variety of other things. And obviously everybody has an imprint. And so now that's sort of going. I mean, there's people that I'm sure that you listen to who have partnerships and imprint deals with each other and boost each other up. And I don't know who you talk to, so I'm not going to drop names publicly because I want these people to still like me. And I might be in business with them too in certain ways. And moving forward in the next year, there might be stuff going on, which is going to be super interesting when I present it to them. They just don't know it yet. But obviously, where do you guys see indie comics going? Because it is such a weird space. And I view it differently, and I'll state why I view it differently. I view it from an investing standpoint, because that is my background. I am a comic book investor. That is an area that I have a good expertise in, and I have a lot of comics. I buy and sell a lot of comics, and obviously I view indie comics in that regard, as well as I like to read this stuff. But I like to say, okay, what is investable in this sector? But where do you guys see it? Because it is a very interesting space. And
yeah, so it's funny because John and I were talking about this today. My background a little bit too. I was, drummer in a punk rock hardcore band back in like the 90s. And this indie comic book space, man, reminds me totally about that type of era where you had to network together, right? This is pre-internet. Like you think about 93, right? So we're, talking to other bands. We say, hey, man, you get us a show here, we'll get you a show there. And you trade that and you build out a whole tour down the East Coast that way. Check out this band, and to your point, the big labels back then, of course, were like your Warner Brothers Records and, Capitol and all those guys. So you could really draw a parallel to that too. So it's exciting for me to come back to this because it's like, man, I used to do this stuff in the 90s with networking like this and sharing with each other. And you really need to help each other out. Like in this scene, that scene, You know, you have to share the books. Hey, this is a cool title. Check this out. Look at this. You know, and you know, we were thinking about doing things at cons. Like, hey, man, like not everybody can get to the New Hampshire Comic Con. So why don't we grab some titles? We'll throw them on our table. Sure, that's great. You got cards for other comics. Awesome. That's the kind of stuff that you got to do. And I think that that's going to be more people. And I haven't run into anybody that's, you know, been reluctant to help out, which is phenomenal. The scene's been great so far. You know, guys like yourself willing to have us on and let us do our thing. It's been great. So that needs to happen if you want the indie scene to succeed, right? And then I guess that the question becomes, you know, happened in the music world is, well, when do you quote unquote sell out, right? So, this band got signed to Warner Brothers. Now their music's compromised, right? So that's something to think about too, is like, do you lose your art along the way also as part of that process? And you try to keep it real with the indie scene where you can do whatever you want and not have to answer to shareholders and all that other fun stuff. So, but really a lot of parallel to that old indie rock music scene in the indie comic book world.
Yeah, it's very. I don't know much about the indie rock scene and the punk rock scene. I was never a part of that. I'm 28.
It was a
I
good
am
time,
not.
buddy. It was a good time.
I am not a music guy per se. I enjoy music as much as everybody enjoys listening to it and tapping my foot to it when it wants to tap. But the idea is that obviously I get the point of it, and I just think that indie comics are very much in a golden age right now, and I think that it's just one of those things. There's just a lot of people on indie comics and on Kickstarter pushing things out. And there's a lot of good stories. And I don't know how long you guys have been on Kickstarter, but I've been on Kickstarter for about 2.5 years now. I was just backing projects. And I would say in the last 12 months, the stories have gone up at least by 50% in quality and better art and all sorts of stuff. And it's also become a lot more international. And so I don't know how long both of you have been even just reading stuff off of Kickstarter, but it's been a very cool thing where comics have become way better as a product in the last year, I would say, than ever before, unless I am just noticing how good they become. And they've always been that way. But I don't think that's the case. I think that the talent has really risen out in the indie world. And I'm curious how you guys feel about that.
I would. I mean, I started researching Kickstarter back when we were first developing everything, so it's not like I was in the Kickstarter scene beforehand. So I can't really speak to that end of it. But yeah, there's a lot of high end stuff out there. There's a lot of noise too. There's a lot of people, doing it as hobby and so forth. But yeah, I mean, there's some competition for sure. I don't think that's a bad thing though.
And I also think there's just new ideas. And I think that also things that couldn't have been done 5 years ago in comics can be done now. And that people are more receptive to it. And not even necessarily the quality, but just the fact that there's a lot more experimentation of being stories that could be told. Like I say this out of complete respect, your story 3 years ago, I don't think this story, Yoel, could have been told. I think that in today's age, it can be, because I think people are way more open. I think people are looking for alternative stories. And I also think people are sick of Marvel and DC and even Image to some degree and the same old, same old. And people are saying, hey, what is different out there from a story standpoint? What is different in a concept? I could tell you I'm a big anime fan, and I am just sick of watching My Hero Academia. It's not that My Hero is a bad show. It's just that it is the same old, same old. I'm looking for the show that's, okay, this is different. This is a different position. This is giving a new spin on something. And so I also think that's changed tremendously in Kickstarter in the last, 3 years minimum, if not, in the last year.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I wanted to touch upon too. Listening to some of your other shows talking about that also, I think the human interest stories are really prevalent right now because we're all kind of living in a human interest story with everything we dealt with over the past year and a half. So you see some of the traditional superhero stuff, like, to your point, it's kind of like, okay, cool. But I think one of your shows you were talking about, the guys can't be killed. So who cares anymore, right? So, right. So, it's kind of like, okay, no one's going to kill off Superman because of intellectual property, like you were talking about. But, you know, look at the popular titles right now. They're all human interest stories, right? Where you could insert yourself into that world. You could be that character, you know, and I think that that's really huge right now. And you're seeing more of that, I feel. Maybe it's just the stories I gravitate towards personally, but you're seeing more of that in the storytelling. You're seeing more of that in the series that, you know, Netflix and these other people are picking up. Is it's more just, you know, a series of people that are thrust into this situation and have to deal with it. And all of us are doing that right now. So I think it really hits home, and people can relate regardless of what their background in comics and, you know, that genre is.
Yeah, and I just think that also people are just fed up with DC and all that stuff, and I think people want variety, and I think people want a different story and say, okay, this is interesting. Let me see what it's going to do. And so obviously that's how I view things, and I'm back in stories obviously that I'm more interested in, and I mean that's just the way I am. And if you look at what I'm reading, also in comics, I just got a Comixology subscription, and obviously I'm reading a lot of interesting things. I'm reading the Black Dahlia, which is that book from maybe like 6 years ago about that crime, and it's super more interesting than reading Batman. Because while Batman by Scott Snyder is fantastic and it's written beautifully, it's Batman, and I know a lot about Batman already. Like, at a certain point, I want more information and I want to spin on things. So that's how I view things. But obviously, I do want to back out of everything that's coming out with Livid Comics. I know you got some sci-fi stuff coming, and there's a bunch of other stuff out there. And obviously, we spoke a lot about Joel and Yul and all that stuff. And obviously, Merry Christmas to everybody when they see this. But I am curious to even go further into Kickstarter because we sort of touched upon it. And it's obviously going to talk a little bit about cons, where Kickstarter in many ways has become almost a distribution center in a lot of ways. And obviously everybody has Kickstarter and utilizes it differently. Some people use it to pay themselves back because they outlay the money for artists. Other people use it just to cover printing costs. And then there's a mixture of the two. And obviously it's a business, and it's a publishing business in a lot of ways. And so obviously, how do you guys feel about Kickstarter and what's going on with that? Because it's utilized in a bunch of different ways. And I know you guys sort of use it to kick forward and cover printing costs and things of that nature. And so obviously, how do you guys feel about even where Kickstarter is going? Because it is such an interesting sector, and even expanding that, crowdfunding in general.
Yeah, I think exactly. I mean, we view it as, really at the end of the day, we want to put out this comic no matter what, whether we get funded on Kickstarter or not. We want issue 1 out into people's hands. Obviously for us to continue as a company and continue to put other stories out, other issues out, we need the support. We can't pay out of pocket the entire existence of Livid Comics. So part of it is paying ourselves back for stuff we're paying out of pocket up front to make sure we have, like Joel said, we want the comic done. We have it in the printer's hands right now. We haven't even started our Kickstarter yet. So, ultimately we're getting our printing, regardless. It's all about looking into the future and expanding our company, offering other titles, maybe some more exclusive stuff that we wouldn't really pay for out of pocket, special editions, hardcovers, things that we need that extra funding for, using other artists, other writers that are known out there in the comic world that will get us some notoriety and exposure too. We want to use some of those bigger names that people are gonna be like, wow, he did a cover for those guys, like, let's check this out. So I think that's how we view it, ultimately.
And then that sort of further goes into, and I got an interesting question, because obviously you got to speak about networking. And I'm curious, and I'm actually going to be asking a lot more people this question, is do you feel that Kickstarter is more of a networking play, or do you feel like it's more of a marketing play? Because the way I view Kickstarter in a lot of ways is that I feel it's almost 80% marketing, versus 20% networking and even conventions. And I have this discussion, and I actually haven't had this discussion, I want to, with certain people, and I have a bunch of people in mind. And I sort of want to challenge them, and I think I'm going to throw out the challenge a little bit here, where I clearly view Kickstarter as a marketing play. Because if you're really good at Facebook ads and can get your Kickstarter into and get your customer acquisition costs super down, and you can get it to down for $1, and you know the person's buying 15, that's an amazing rate of return because it is a business. And while you want people to like your comic, you also want people to back your Kickstarter because it is just as important somebody backs it. You know, you want people to read your comic, but you also want people to back your Kickstarter. If they buy the book and just throw it in a comic bag and don't read it, you still made that pledge. And so how did you guys view that? Because that's a very, touchy issue. And I know it can get controversial because some people say, oh, it's all networking. But, I'm not too sure because I view Kickstarter as a marketing play, much like this is a marketing play if I want to become big at it.
Yeah, I would definitely concur with your thought there. Initially it was, this is an additional, like we mentioned, the success being a 4-pronged attack or however many prongs you want, at least 4, but definitely a marketing play first is, okay, here's another platform. It's basically free to use, right? Other than our time to put it together, you can put your stuff up there and let it fly. I do use that now also as networking, though, to a degree. I've met some local artists and things that I would never have known through that platform by just looking at their campaign and say, this is really cool, man. Connect with them outside of Kickstarter, Facebook, Instagram, and follow those guys as well. But it's absolutely a marketing play as part of it. And I could see it easily being, the future for a lot of what products are released. I mean, what was it? The Todd McFarlane Spawn raised over $5 million or something. And he said he may never release a toy in the shelves again of a store because it was so successful. So this is something that's getting people's attention. Those are real numbers, man. Those aren't, it's not just a hobbyist anymore. These are some big boys that are coming into this field, and a crowd attracts a crowd. So they're going to bring in more eyes to it. You mentioned it being a little low this year. That could be a whole myriad of reasons. The production time of books and things may be discouraging some people, world events, life events.
Well, what's going on with that is that people are saying 2020 was an anomaly situation, and it's oblique because you had Keanu Reeves and Scott Snyder in there, and you had a few other big names in there, and that's not the norm. And where a rising tide raises all ships, and that this right now, what's going on, is the normal. And it was, I don't know what the number was before 2020 and 2019, but people are saying, hey, 2021 so far is the normal. And some projects do well, some projects don't. But if you have big boys coming in and then they're doing $10 million in funding, in a matter of 5 months, everybody's ship gets raised. And that's perfectly fine, but that's not the norm. And if that happens every 3 years, that's fine. But you can't use that as a strategy versus saying, doing something along the lines of saying, hey, you got to be on podcasts, you got to be on shows, you got to put into Facebook groups, you got to actually have an email list. Those are legitimate strategies that work, both when ships are rising and when ships are falling. And so that's what's going on with that. And nobody knows exactly because it's going to take some time to figure out what that deal is. But I do agree with, and obviously I made the statement where I do think it's more of a marketing play.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm just wondering, with the advent of more and more indie books, indie companies coming online, if they're going to think about using that marketing play while they're bringing new eyes to Kickstarter, right? So we got people, they have never touched a Kickstarter in their life, right? And they're signing up to look at our campaign. Well, maybe now they look at somebody else's, right? So it could be just army ants attacking this thing, right? We're getting a bunch of small players bringing in small crowds and big numbers, right? So that could ultimately be what you see too.
That could be it too, or it could be that if somebody comes in for Keanu Reeves, they're only there for Keanu Reeves. Right. And so it gets very tricky because obviously, again, I'm sure we're going to figure this all out in the next 18 months because it does take time for the data to work itself out. But even the fact that if I think like 5,000, or it had to be more. I don't know how many people backed the Keanu Reeves Berserk book, but it was like 1.2 million, so it had to be a lot of people. So obviously somebody out of that group wound up backing another Kickstarter, without a doubt, just statistically. But the question is that was it 5%? Was it 1%? Was it 15%? And that's what I want to know, is that what was the retention rate? And then how many people are backing 6 projects a year out of that because they were brought in? And so that's what I'm curious about versus somebody who was already there and might have backed a few more projects because it was on. And those numbers are super interesting. But obviously, leading into my next question, because it sort of goes to the networking side, is cons are very interesting right now. Obviously, COVID is turning around. Most people who wanted a vaccination got a vaccination. A lot of people are vaccinated, and vaccinations are readily available. And we're going to have the Summer of the Con, where almost every weekend there's 4 or 5 cons going on in the U.S. I think starting now, actually. And so obviously all throughout June, July, and August, I know it's going to be very con heavy. So, and I know you guys are going to a con, I think in September. So where do you think the convention scene is going? Because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's been virtual things that have worked. There's been virtual things that haven't worked. Obviously, there's going to be some changes that have to be put in place. And I don't know where you guys feel about all of that, because I'm sure you went to cons as fans, but what do you feel like it's going to look like as a comic team and selling books and even, all that stuff?
I've been to some shows recently, and I've been pretty encouraged with the crowds that have been there. So we're lucky in our area, the COVID stuff's not such an issue in New Hampshire as it would be like New York City, Boston, obviously those areas. So, I mean, man, I was at a show in April and it was almost shoulder to shoulder in there. I mean, the turnout was phenomenal. I was stunned how many people were there.
So let me ask a question, because I was speaking with Travis Gibb. I don't know if you know Travis.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he was saying down in Florida is that people had their list of what they wanted to buy, but they weren't buying anything excessive. And so they were buying what's on their list, and that things were sort of very pricey to some degrees. A Giant Size X-Men 1.0 was like $2,000, which is pricey for that book. And so obviously people were being very selective with their money. And so and he said the first day was great, but obviously the second day and third day were more slumpish. And so I don't know if you were paying attention economically, but what did it look like on that front? Because that's what I'm more interested in. Because if you're an indie comic creator, you want to sell your book, and people say, hey, look, I need, first copy of Starfire. I need, a DC Presents number 26. And then you have your indie book out there that may or may not bite, because they're like, well, this money's more stingy, and they have more of a list versus maybe 2 years ago, people were like, this looks cool. I have a good job. I know I'm getting a bonus this year, and I can afford, certain things and take risks. So I don't know if you were paying attention to that and what that looked like. And maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe it was just that con was it the issue, and maybe people were just saying, hey, I'm only looking for certain things at this con, and that's that. And maybe at another con, people are saying, hey, I got a bunch of money, and cool, I'm going to buy every indie book here. So, but I don't know what your thought is on that and what you saw.
Yeah, so definitely to your point, the prices were really, I wouldn't say high, but higher, right? So I think there's that built-in factor now where people want to haggle, right? So, I saw Giant Size X-Men 9 grade, I think it was like $30,000 or something like that. So, it was up there, right? And there's some books that I chase personally. I kind of go in, I don't, this probably happens to a lot of people. I get book amnesia when I go into a place like that. I have what I have in my mind that I think I want to get, and I totally, by the time I exit the door, I totally forgot to look for that. So that happens all the time. But you had to wait to search through your long boxes. So, people were, obviously going through that stuff and taking their time. And I just saw the normal comic shop or comic show price bump on things. I didn't personally witness any, monetary exchange or business going on, things like that. But there was definitely at that particular show in Concord, New Hampshire, our state capital, not a big town. There was some pretty big stuff at that show. A lot of original art, Jack Kirby stuff. I mean, the guy that had that stuff, I was like, damn, man, how the heck did you get a hold of this? Did you like rob his house or something? I mean, there's some good stuff there at that show.
So did you feel from a merchandise standpoint, because I'm curious, is that like all this merch has been sort of held up for about 18 months, and now people want to sell it, and all this stuff hasn't been at cons and it hasn't moved, not because, you know, people want to hold on to it, but because there's really no place to put it on the market. And so now at cons, there's also, you know, the 5 dealers might have a 1.0 each that they're selling of X-Men 1, and then that obviously is going to have an adverse effect on something. So obviously, you know, people have an abundance of merch. I know this because I have an abundance of merch, and you know, I am selling stuff on eBay, and it's very interesting because, and I've been slowly moving things through. But obviously, I'm go to a con, I have 4 times as much merch as I normally would carry in my eBay store at this time. And so if I'm to go to a comic store and a comic shop and or a convention where I can't speak today, obviously there's going to be more merch on my end that I'm trying to sell. So I'm just curious because obviously this affects indie comics, because if people have more money, they're willing to take more risk. If you have less money, you know, or they're more stingy and they know what they're looking for exactly and they're taking their time to find it. Super interesting because, you know, indies are hard sell sometimes.
Yeah. So let's talk about like the Comic-Con look for a change, a little bit different than a show, right? So we were talking about, man, you really got to do something with your booth to get someone to come on over there. You know, you almost need the inflatable wacky arm man flying around or something. Be like, oh, you were the guys with the giant inflatable spider, you know, hanging from your booth. So we want to kind of do that. Like, don't look like their traditional Comic-Con booth with the banner at the table, right? Let's do something different. You know, giving away a little bit of our idea. We were thinking about maybe like we set up looks like a haunted library, you know, that you can come in. Right. And maybe there's if they'll let us have like a smoke machine or fog machine or something fun, but you know, something that stands out in that room and you go, holy crap, I got to go check out what the heck is going on at that booth. Boom, we get them there. And if we can produce a quality product, we feel that we can probably capture that sale and make the price point right too. So make it so it's worth the value for someone to purchase that. Why this book over anybody else's book? We got to have that ready to go. And that's what we'll present to people at that time.
Yeah, I think experience matters right now more so than anything else. I also think that the saying is that you have to be the cheapest, the most expensive, or the most valuable, and you have to give somebody something. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know if you know Brett Juliano. He does Dust Bunny Mafia, and his booth is set up like it's an Italian restaurant, like from The Godfather. And so you got like the thing, because obviously he writes a comic about, you know, bunny mafia members and other creatures, and so I don't know, promorphic, I think is the term. I might have messed the term up, but it's this idea that he comes out and he's wearing like an old like 1930s type suit, and obviously you're stepping into, you know, where mobsters would hang out when you're buying his book, and so you're now buying a book from him in the sense of, okay, I'm now having an experience and people stop and they actually, and then he says hi and then he can try to sell you. And so I think experiences matter, because when I come to a con, you know, you got to get my attention, because you got 7 seconds at best. And I can tell you for a fact that I'm the worst because I build a budget out before I go to a con. I've been doing it for years, and I got $1,000, and then that's my budget, and every dollar has an assignment, whether that's getting a book graded, whether that's this thing, whether it's that thing, and then if I might have $50 for fun of random stuff of, oh, I like that cover over there and I want that cover. But that's all I have, because, and I stick to the battle plan, and the ATM is not my friend. So obviously that's something that I think is super important right now. I think you nailed it in a lot of ways.
I mean, I love the idea of, you know, the theme being based around some of your own titles too. You know, I've talked to Joel about, you know, let's talk to some metal artists. Maybe we can get them to build, you know, a model of the Cassie and have it like the lasers and lights coming out of it in the center of our table, like something that stands out. You just gave me the idea with the costume. Maybe, you know, my brother's probably watching this right now, so if we can get one of those smoke dragon costumes made by somebody, maybe we can have him standing around scaring people. You know, something to catch people's attention.
And obviously, there's a bunch of stuff, and we beat this down pretty hard on so many things, and I can give you so many ideas off the top of my head because I know this space so well now. For the guy who's never run a Kickstarter, it may or may not want to at some point. Obviously, you know, there's so many things you can do, and it's very interesting what's going on with all this. But I do want to give you guys an opportunity to promote yourself because I know that you got some Facebook pages, I think. I know you got a website. Obviously, the Kickstarter's dropping tomorrow. Those links are up ahead. And where can people find both of you guys and all these projects and everything else that's out there? Because obviously, I want to be able to support what you're doing. And so, floor is yours.
Yeah, so we have, find us online, straight up website, lividcomics.com. Nice and easy, lividcomics.com. Facebook, facebook.com/lividcomics. On Instagram, it would be at @livid_comics. And then on Twitter, it's at lividcomic, no S, singular, lividcomic, singular.
And obviously, I've been saying this all along with everybody is that you have to support indie. What that means is that anybody who's an indie creator, you should support them. Obviously, both of these guys from Livid Comics are doing a Kickstarter, drops tomorrow. That's probably the first and fastest, easiest way how to support indie comics, especially when they're doing Kickstarters, is to pledge to that Kickstarter. So, and that is super important. And obviously, you know, to produce an indie book, you know, it costs money. They are not DC, they are not Marvel. You know, there's no big, deep pockets here, and a lot of the money with indie comics goes to either paying the artist, printing costs, marketing costs, stretch goals, and it sometimes just goes to going forward. And so obviously the more you pledge, and it's not charity because you're actually getting something in return, the further that project goes. And so it is super important if you are financially able to do so. Same thing with me. If you like what I do here, buy me a coffee. Links up above for their Kickstarter as well. Obviously, though, if you are in a financial rough situation, I don't want you to go into debt for me or for their Kickstarter. I think they will understand COVID has wrecked a lot of people, and it has put a lot of people in financial harm, and there's lots and lots of people hanging on by a financial shoestring. So if you're in that circumstance, please don't go into debt to support somebody if you cannot support yourself. And that means please take care of your mortgage, your house, your rent, everything that's going on, electricity, food, shelter, water. Got kids, make sure your kids are good. Got a wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, make sure they're good. If you're living alone but you got a dog, you know, make sure your dog's good, and also make sure you're good for the next month. And if that's the circumstance you're in, the best way how to support is by liking, sharing, you know, the Kickstarter, obviously this podcast, and a variety of other things, because sharing goes a long way. Because you don't know who you're sharing it to, you don't know who you're sharing it with, and it could very well be that you share it on your wall and somebody sees the Kickstarter, and this has happened on my show where it was shared on my wall and somebody backed the Kickstarter live. It was like, this project is awesome, and I didn't even know this existed. And so that happens, and you don't know who you're sharing to, and that is super important at this point. And so on that note, I'm going to let you guys have the final word.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I appreciate you having us on. I mean, everything you just said is, I wouldn't say it any differently. I mean, if you can't afford to support the Kickstarter, share it. Go on, sign up for notifications of the launch. I mean, you know, I didn't even realize this was important, but you know, the more people that sign up for the notification, it starts that counter on Kickstarter, and you know, Kickstarter can push that a little bit more if they see the interest building for our Kickstarter, whether you're going to be able to afford to support us or not. If you're signed up for that notification, that's getting us attention on Kickstarter. So anything you can do, you know, share, like, whatever, it's going to help us out.
Yeah, we'd like to thank you, Andrew, obviously, for your support too in the indie scene here. You know, if there are other young artists out there, writers, if we could be of any help, let us know what we can do to help you. It's not just about Livid, about Yule. But we really want to hear from you guys. We'd really like to help anybody in the way we can, also sharing their campaigns, want to read your story, want to hear from you. So definitely make sure you connect with us also. We'd be happy to help you in any way that we can, because you guys help us just by listening to this show, sharing our campaign. We'll return the love for you.
And on that note, I couldn't have said it any better myself, so that is a wrap.